one matchup does the public need to know about that's under the radar? That and more this week on the couch. We turn the page quickly. Week 1, Rich Hribar, Sharp Football here. What's the under the radar week 1 matchup that people aren't talking enough about? They need to know from you, the Lord.
Oh, so many this week, and I like to talk about a lot of matchups in my weekly column. But I'm looking at this Bills Jets game. Not a lot of sex among the industry in this game, but I mean, this is a matchup at home in New York. I mean, you look at the last 3 times they've played, the game has gone well over. They've scored in the 50s the last 3 times they've played, and there's a lot of players that we kind of like in this game, as players that we've been talking about either over the course of the summer or, players that we just believe in season long or just might have a great matchup. But I think it's a fun game on both sides. Obviously the Jets, I think that what they showed in the preseason and, we've all given Adam Gase a little bit, and it's been warranted the way he coached that team in Miami. And we can say like maybe he treated it like a high school basketball game and he didn't have the talent, and that's why he slowed games down and tried to muck them up. But we like to see the tempo that they played with in the preseason because they have the pieces to do it. But obviously they won't have Herndon for the first 4 games, and Robbie it looks like he's on track to play. But between Robbie, Crowder, Herndon, Enunwa, Le'Veon out of the backfield, and whatever the wild card Ty Montgomery is going to bring, it's an offense that's a lot of pieces that should be exciting. They shouldn't be ruined or reined in. It should be. And then you've got, second year Sam Darnold at the helm. So, I mean, it's an offense that should be fun. And then the Bills, you have to just respect what the Bills have done around Josh Allen, because halfway through the season, they realized Josh Allen's shortcomings, and they've seemed to roll over into building up his strengths. When he came back from that elbow injury last year, he dropped back to second most times in the NFL from spread formation, just empty sets, and that's Josh Allen's game, man. That's his MO. Yeah. We want to make the reads easy. We want him to use his arm, and we want him to take the hell off when the read isn't there. And that's kind of how they built this team. They bring in John Brown, who's just a complete overlap for Allen's skill sets. Beasley, maybe not, but you have to get one of those types of guys. Every team seems like it has like a Beasley type now, and then they kind of worked him out in the preseason. And Zay Jones is still a kind of an interesting guy in year 3. He took a big step forward from year 1 to year 2, and then they let go. They take the sunk cost and Shady, and they turn this over to a kind of a committee backfield. But they got some guys that could do some things in the backfield as well. So I mean, I look at that game and I think it's a good game. It's a mark to go over. That 40-point total, it feels way too low for me. So it could be one of those games that is sneaky upside for a fantasy stance in week 1.
Absolutely. So let's drill down on that specific matchup since you brought it up. And what I really love, Rich, is the positivity, because we can turn the page and we think about the beginning of the big reveal. So like you said, there's the whole Adam Gase, Sam Darnold, the offense, and how we reframe something that I've been saying a lot, Rich, lately is every time we see something new, it changes what we've already seen. Like we recontextualize it. And like you said, we recontextualize Gase in Miami now and say, hey, he was doing the best with what he had. Now he's got something again like he did in Denver. So we got the Darnold reveal, Robbie Anderson on Tre'Davious White. How confident are you? Rich, some of these leagues, you set your week 1 lineups and you're making some aspirational picks. And that's something else we're going to talk about, going from draft mode to weekly mode, because it is a whole different mindset. And we have to make that shift, even though there's still drafts happening. I'm doing the Football Guy staff draft, our Fessel OG league tonight. And I know that a lot of high stakes leagues even will draft on Friday and Saturday, but we're making that switch over. So you're looking at your lineups. What about someone like Jamison Crowder? He's had a really good summer. There's a few injury scare, but that was it. It was just a scare. I even saw one piece, Rich, that said that the Jets were designing plays to target him in the red zone, in the end zone. And plays that were kind of Adam Gase staples. The chemistry between he and Sam Darnold is good. And then on the flip side, the other player that maybe you didn't draft as a starter, do you think about John Brown against a gimpy Tremaine Johnson? And with Robbie Anderson getting Tre'Davious White, Jamison Crowder is going to get a better matchup. What do you think about these undercard wide receivers in this matchup?
Yeah, those are the two guys I've got kind of written up, as the guys that you would entertain using. If you don't really love your wide receiver 3 or your flex spot. I mean, those are the kind of
Or
guys that I'm
DFS, of
looking at.
course, too.
Yeah, yeah, and DFS. Obviously, I mean, John Brown, like we talked about, marriage of skill sets. I mean, 28.2% of Josh Allen's throws were 15 yards or further downfield this year, by far the best in the league. Since John Brown, entered the league, 34% of his career targets are on those throws. He's a guy that we talk about the Jets. They couldn't guard anyone last year, and Tremaine Johnson's coming off an injury. So I mean, there's big play upsides. Josh Brown could be one of those guys that gets 12 targets and maybe you look and only 4 hit and you're like, Josh, but those 4 are going to be tangible if when you hit. So that kind of matters. And John Brown might have a lot of games like that this year, just because but you're getting the body, you're getting those shots. Like the haymakers are coming. Like Josh Allen's not scared to take those shots. And with Crowder, like you said, you laid out. So no Herndon. So he's going to be those intermediate tertiary targets are all going to be Crowders. The matchup also sets up well because, even if Robbie A plays, on the calf, he's going to get Tre'Davious White. Jamison Crowder is going to get Buffalo's primary nickelback, Taron Johnson, who's kind of working himself also back from like a preseason groin injury. It just sets up really well for Crowder, so you can know Herndon in the matchup, and then probably the pass volume that's going to be needed because I think that you'll see that them work the middle of the field more. It'll be Le'Veon out of the backfield, Ty Montgomery out of the backfield, and Crowder in the middle. That's where you want to go, against the Bills. Running backs had a lot of success catching the ball against them, and they also score a lot of touchdowns against the Bills. I mean, with Le'Veon, it's interesting. It's a situation where they work him back a little bit. We haven't really seen him. Are they going to give him like a full workload? Because Ty Montgomery looked really good in the preseason. It was one of those things where you heard the you saw the smoke, but you really wanted to see the fire. And they showed it in the preseason. Ty Montgomery looked great in that offense. Mm-hmm. So it just depends how much we see. How many snaps is Ty Montgomery really going to play? How many plays they're really die up to him? But yeah, running backs against the Bills have been a point of emphasis for a while because that secondary is so good, on the boundaries, and their safety play is so good. So I mean, we like to attack them, in the slot and with running backs. So I mean, those are the guys I'm looking at in that game for sure.
And again, you mentioned Le'Veon Bell, and just as a football fan, we get the first seeing Le'Veon Bell in a non-Steelers uniform. That's going to be interesting. And the Bills, and we're going to start the dominoes here, Rich. Okay, because we had quite a breathtaking 24 hours over the weekend. It was not a restful, long weekend. It was laborious for some of us that have been spending all summer building our meticulous understanding of how all these pieces fit together in our rankings and our draft strategies. And then someone comes along and just like kicks over our house of cards, really. Starting with Buffalo, because we woke up on Sunday to news that Lesean McCoy had a new team. He was going to be looking for a new team as of Saturday morning. And that opens the door to Devin Singletary. So other things in this game too, by the way, since we're drilling down, the Jets have some offensive line injuries, some guys working their way back, and Buffalo does too. Buffalo has a whole new look offensive line, and you've got some badasses, man. We get to watch Quinnen Williams, we get to watch Ed Oliver, we get to watch, and of course, like Leonard Williams. We get to watch some players that are going to wreak some havoc. But you have Devin Singletary. This was not the best situation for a running back last year, but you have new blood, and if we see that LeSean McCoy is really on the decline, then maybe there was more there than McCoy could harvest last year. So are you more warm or cool on Singletary now that he has a pretty clear path to being the number one back if he plays up to that level?
Yeah, kind of a 1 foot in, 1 foot out type of situation. I loved him as like a wide receiver heavy build and zero RB type of draft pick for that situation. He was just a good objective bet. I mean, you had McCoy at 31 coming off of, 2 declining years. You had Frank Gore, the running back Shang Tsung. He just swallowed the souls of everybody. He's never going to retire until his son plays in the league. So we get like a Griffey and Griffey Jr. type situation with Frank Gore. And then you had TJ Yeldon, who the league has shown. I think that the community kind of likes TJ Yeldon more than the NFL shown. The NFL is kind of always just treated him like this ancillary component since his rookie season. And we saw that in free agency play out as well. I think a lot of people thought he was going to get a job right away in free agency, and he kind of was on the back leg of signings and, went to this muddled situation. So, I mean, Singletary always felt like the best objective bet to make. But now that he has elevated and now is on everyone's radar, it's kind of like one of those, well, I got him when I could, kind of cool off for a little bit. So I do think that they'll start the year off with a bit of a committee and, use Frank Gore a little bit. And we know that Josh Allen, he was well under the league rate of targeting running backs out of the backfield. Anytime you have one of these mobile quarterbacks, we talked about it. Listen, they're going empty. And if that read's not there, I'm running. That's what Josh Allen's MO is. He's going to take off. He's not really going to check it down unless it's really dialed up. So, I mean, how many passes does Singletary catch out of the box? And the other thing is, too, is like I talk about all the time, but Singletary's one of those purgatory backs that I talk about. I mean, he's one of these guys that's, 5'10", 205, not a great pass catching resume. NFL coaches tend to like kind of get caught in the middle with these guys. They either don't give them a bunch of touches unless it's a necessity. So they kind of get these hollow body touches, I call them, where it's just yardage, yardage only. So he might not catch a lot of passes and he might not score touchdowns. Where in fantasy, you're like, oh man, Singletary is clearly the best guy in his backfield every week. But for fantasy, it's just not transitioning because he's just getting yards, So, I mean, he's kind of in one of those areas for me. I think as you enter the season, he's probably just like a flex only. And you hope that as the season progresses, his opportunity just continues to manifest.
And it really is one of those situations, Rich, where there's one level that is what do you think about the player Singletary? Because underneath this and in all the Buffalo coverage too, is his role is going to be as big as what he shows he deserves. So that's the variable of how Singletary going to play. But then there's the Buffalo situation, which you outlined well with Josh Allen and how it affects that. Let's just put the rubber to the road. Okay, like just simple up down kind of Justice Hill or Devin Singletary.
I mean, you got to go to Singletary just for the opportunity that's already opened.
So Singletary is are we getting wild with this like Justice Hill? I'm sorry, Devin Singletary or like Austin Eckler.
Oh yeah, that's way too crazy.
So Singletary is not someone that you're reaching for. But of the backs, and when we get into backs that aren't necessarily automatic starters for you, 5th, 6th round, because around that Eckler drop off, and Singletary joins that group of those aspirational backs. Well, here's one is an easy transition for you: Singletary or LeSean McCoy.
I mean, I think you got to go Shady just for the blanket upside, right? I mean, just for the unknown. I mean, and Shady was a guy I kind of had taken up off my draft boards, but I mean, it's just like he went to the one spot. There was like one spot that really could have made him like fantasy relevant, and like because if he would have went to Houston, like.
No,
it'd have been similar. All right, like okay, he probably still wasn't going to catch passes. Offensive line still issues, even though they add Tunsil. But I mean, he went to the one spot where it's like, all right, we have this unknown in Damian Williams. We talked about Damian Williams last time I was on the show in the summer, and Darwin Thompson. So it's like, and he's reunited with a coach who obviously believes in him. So I mean, there's opportunity there. We want stakes in that offense. We want pieces of that offense. So if he's going to be a cheap component of that offense, I mean, we're willing to take on the zero that could come along with it. But we want to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. McCoy, it's tough, Rich, because Mccoy represents, on one hand, your eyes tell you like that's not a guy I want to invest in on my fantasy team, and just the generally taking running backs in their 30s, especially running backs in their 30s that were just released by their team. Like, it all sounds bad, but then the Kansas City running back situation is so good that it might just require mere competence, and he can be mere competence, and he has a coach that likes him, and they just threw money at him. Like, they're going to at least see what they have in him. So that's kind of what. And you take McCoy in the 7th or 8th round. I think that's about where he's falling. And I guess it all depends on your build, because if you're set at running back at that point, if you're like 3 deep at running back and you love it, then you're kind of throwing away a pick on McCoy. But if you've gone running back light, then you give McCoy a shot at the beginning of the season, and 12 touches in that backfield, especially if he's treated like the first guy who gets his number called at the goal line. That could be plenty. But what about Damian Williams? And Rich, I say this like a lot of us have already drafted, but you can take advantage of this right now, because people paid a 3rd round pick, maybe a 2nd round pick for Damian Williams, and you can scoop in and get them in the moment. Or if you have him, this might be time to deal him. Or it might just be sit tight. It's between like buy, sit tight, and sell on Damian Williams, knowing that people haven't quite fixed his new value yet. And what we see week 1 against Jacksonville, which could be a kind of a tough matchup, is going to influence a lot. What move should we make, if any, before week 1?
Yeah, it's a real tough spot because I don't know what he's actually going to draw. I mean, I always had him. I had him around 36 overall this offseason, which is like the end of the third round, which is what I thought. Which is what I thought. Which is what I thought he like was fair value to like take a little bit of plunge on the risk, and then the upside is still there. But yeah, there was a lot of times where he's not there. He wasn't there at any of those points in the draft. I mean, this is even with Carlos Hyde. He still was going in that mid 2. Kind of range. But I think the benefit for him is obviously the pass catching. He caught 5 or more passes in 4 of his 5 starts. And he only had 17.5 touches per game. Kind of reasonable still. He only went over 15 touches, I think, twice in those games. So I mean, still kind of reasonable. Like in the 15 touch range, we could be there. There's a lot of value still in that offense. The thing is, we have the Chiefs at Sharp Football by far the 32nd ranked run schedule. Like it's like a big gap to 31. So like it's one of those things like where the run schedule's not great, although you kind of throw schedule a little bit out the Chiefs because you're talking about how Andy Reid has used backs and just the overall production. But I mean the schedule isn't good. There's probably not going to be a scenario now with Damian Williams and LeSean McCoy where those guys are ripping off huge rushing games, while they're getting carries together. So it all comes down to if he can just hold on to enough of the rushing volume and hold like all the receiving work. Because what this does now, the addition of McCoy, is it really hurts a guy like Darwin Thompson because you can make a committee with 2 backs, but the third back really doesn't get enough snaps and get enough usage. So now Darwin Thompson is kind of like a just the stash guy, whereas earlier in the season he might have carved out some standalone value. Now it's going to be really hard for him to 1, get snaps and 2, get touches. So I mean, you need Damian Williams now to kind of hedge that rushing world that LeSean McCoy is definitely going to work his way into, and then hold on that receiving work in that Chiefs offense, which we just don't know because I mean Shady's capable of catching passes as well, so we just don't really know. So I mean, I think if you have him, you're just in a hold situation right now. I don't think that you're going to get close to your near 2-3 turn investment in return on a trade. So I mean, I don't know what you really do in that regards. I mean, it's probably contextual on what you get offered. But yeah, I kind of always had him at like round pick 36. So it's kind of I only have him on 1 team right now.
So you were lower, and okay. So leaving aside like whether Andy Reid will do something like keep forcing McCoy out on the field, even if he's not effective. I don't want to say best running back, but just not effective. The variable here, Rich, that's interesting, and this is why I want to tell people, like, don't drop Darwin Thompson in a preseason waiver wire run. Hold on to at least what you got as a ticket to see the week 1 reveal. And even if Darwin Thompson, Rich, I submit, even if Darwin Thompson doesn't touch the ball, his value might go way up, right? I mean, if Shady looks washed, then we're looking back at our original take on this backfield of, hey, Damian Williams, every week starter. We want to bring back top 10 upside any given week because of his red zone involvement, because of the passing game. Because the thing is, like, remember Damian Williams on that 62-yard touchdown in the preseason? Like, Shady hasn't looked like that for like 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
And Shady could go out there and just grind out what's there on his touches, and Damian Williams could look explosive like he did late last year, like he did on that play. And even if Darwin Thompson doesn't play, you start asking the question of, when does Andy Reid say, okay, well, we threw $3 million after Shady. We tried. We liked this Darwin Thompson kid before that. The point is the speculative value for Darwin Thompson is still intact. As long as you think there's some possibility that LeSean McCoy is going to look like someone that should just be on the bench, which, I mean, he was just released. And then you have with the Damian Williams, I would be inclined to say, like you said, like hold and maybe even consider putting out a probe to buy, just because I think that there's a sense of disappointment that LeSean McCoy's performance could easily restore most of Damian Williams' value, even if you have to wait a few weeks until Andy Reid figures it out. So we have that whole Kansas City situation, but that's not all that happened. It's Carlos Hyde. See how these dominoes all connect? Isn't this fun? Carlos Hyde ends up in Kansas City. So in Houston. So let's start with that first. Do you have any interest in Carlos Hyde?
None.
Thank you. Turn the page. I agree. And look, I mean, I'm thinking like Buddy Howell, Rivers McCown, who always does great work, broke down some preseason stuff for the Texans. And he said, hey, Buddy Howell might be a better running back than we thought. And also, why didn't the Texans have more interest in Demaria Crockett? But it's actually Karan Higdon. Like, I'm thinking, who's the next guy up after Hyde? And it's maybe Howell. Taiwan Jones is still on that roster, probably for special teams, though. And then there's Higdon on the practice squad. Crockett ended up with the Raiders. But Laramie Tunsil. How excited are we for Deshaun Watson? How much does this move him up? How justifiable does it make him as an early round quarterback in a late round quarterback world?
Yeah, I mean, we were always in on Deshaun Watson, so it only enhances, getting a guy like Laramie Tunsil. And a lot of the sacks that Watson takes are also he's self-conducive to a lot of the sacks he takes, because you know why? He wants to push the ball down the field. Quarterbacks that want to push the ball downfield, they take sacks. That's how it goes. You have longer developing plays, not a good offensive line, you're going to take some sacks. And he's a mobile quarterback, believes he can get away from it. So a lot of the sacks that Watson takes are on him, are self-inflicted as well. But the thing we're most excited about this offense and Watson himself as it pertains is just that the schedule flipped. Look at last year. They faced by far the worst schedule of opposing quarterbacks in the NFL last year. This year, you get some improvement. Obviously, we lose Luck, which is a bummer in division, but they place the NFC South. You get dialed up. All teams that can score points in the NFC South that they're going to play against. And you look at what he's done while playing catch-up mode, and we saw some of this his rookie season, but for his career, and he's at 8.7 yards per pass attempt and 109 quarterback rating while trailing. And while leading, he's just at 7.4 pass attempts, yards per pass attempt, and 93 quarterback rating. And last year we saw, and some of it was a little bit injury, he suffered that midseason injury, but they would get leads, and he'd throw like 24 passes. 22 passes, and was just living on that efficiency, that touchdown efficiency. We're going to have a lot of games this year where Deshaun Watson's dropping back, and he's throwing the ball 30 plus times, and dropbacks equal more scrambles, they eat more passing. It's going to lift everything up in this offense for fantasy purposes. And you talk about their backfield now. Now you go from Lamar Miller, who's kind of a boring, player. Probably a little bit. Lamar Miller's fun because everyone was constantly right about Lamar Miller, both sides. He's like one of those guys. So everyone's like, everyone was right. Like, sure, yeah, he had 5 straight years of 1,100 yards as a pro, but like it was just lived in this RB2 land. Like, wasn't really using the pass game. Duke Johnson is a whole different dynamic that fits into this mold now, this transition that we're going to see this offense kind of take. And Kenny Stills only elevates. I mean, everything is just coming into play for us to be like a really fun passing game. And like I said, the schedule really opens up for them to have to score points this year as well, facing the NFC South. I wish we would have had Andrew Luck, even though Brissett's going to play a little bit better, but I still wish we had Andrew Luck still.
Yeah, isn't it wild? Like, this Andrew Luck story is massive. And the nature of the NFL news cycle is it's already passed through our bloodstream, and when we moved on. And absolutely Andrew Luck's part of the story, because there's an easy way to read the aggressive move by Bill O'Brien, coach/GM, to say, well, I have a window now. Now he's got a window, right? I mean, your biggest rival in the division just lost their starting quarterback, although Jacoby Brissett can still be good. Staying in Houston. And really quickly, I think this one might be quick too. I hope we're brothers in arms on this. I'm still a buy Duke guy. It kind of fits in.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it was a good weekend for Duke, right? Like, if the only competition he got in town was Hyde, then that's a win.
That's what we kept saying about Damian Williams when they signed Hyde. Really,
exactly.
It was the pro. We kept saying it's a pro. All they brought in was Hyde.
So I want to then move the spotlight, and this is part of the reason to like Deshaun Watson more, is Kenny Stills. I think compared to other people, because I actually saw him, one of the heartbreaks of first come, first serve waivers. I saw Kenny Stills dropped in one of my dynasty leagues, and I didn't see it until like an hour later, and someone else snapped him up right away. And I'm looking at Kenny Stills, and I actually put out some offers for him in dynasty. I think he always has been a very good receiver. He's just been in bad places, and now he's in a great place. It's part of the reason I like Duke Johnson. It's Deshaun Watson turns the guys he plays with into gold, like Kiki Cutie. Oh, I'm not even going to go down that road right now. But I'm really bullish about Kenny Stills right now. Did the Kenny Stills part of the transaction register? And if it did, how did it register for you?
I mean, it made this was the one part that made sense for the Houston from a real football stance. From a fantasy stance, I still think it's be a question of how much volume can we count on week to week with Kenny Stills. But I mean, I agree with you. 27 years old, hyper productive player on the types of targets he gets, and then also talk about versatility, which is why I think it makes sense. Kenny Stills is one of those guys. He's run 40% of his routes the past 3 years from the slot. Not traditional slot guy, but he's a guy that has a lot of familiarity playing inside, and we know he can run vertical routes. So the two guys that they are invested in, Will Fuller and Kiki QT, they like, but unfortunately, those guys have had a little trouble, staying healthy. And, so you get insurance on both guys with one guy. So Stills insures both guys because he can play inside and cover that slot role. And then Fuller is like he can also transition and play that role. He can cover both roles for injuries. Then also offers you that versatility. He offers you that depth. He also allows a guy like DeAndre Hopkins to move around a little bit more. DeAndre Hopkins set career highs across the board in targets, catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns from the slot. I mean, talk about the best boundary receiver in the game. He's unguardable on guys that are like 5'10", like 210. Like if you're able to move him around a little bit, that only enhances what your best player can do. So I mean, all that makes sense from a real football sense, like why they would want to add a guy like Kenny Stills. But from a fantasy sense, it still will probably be a lot of weeks where we're just trying to get it right. With Kenny Stills. So, obviously I think he was a great best ball pick anyways. So now if you got him, I don't think you should be down. You should be high on that you got him. He's going to a team that's going to score more points. And he'll probably have an upside to have more big weeks. And we've seen it with guys like Will Fuller, what he did in that offense with just, small amount of targets. He's going to have to share those now with players. Yeah, I mean, I think the upside on a week-to-week basis is absolutely there for him to have some really splash moments.
I mean, I see Kenny Stills as someone who, you mentioned Will Fuller. I mean, I think he could easily elevate to Will Fuller production levels. I think we could find out that as Will Fuller's speedy, but really it was the offense and Deshaun Watson creating that value. And as long as there's someone else, and Kenny Stills has deep speed. And one of the things that I think people don't realize about Stills when this move happened is that he can play inside and outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he can play well inside and outside. He's not just somebody that adds value as a slot receiver and can, operate outside, but isn't really well suited for it. He can do everything you ask. He's kind of toiled in obscurity because down here in New Orleans, I mean, they traded him for that 3rd round pick kind of unceremoniously that it had to do maybe with non-football reasons. The Miami got him and then paid him surprisingly, and then he's been languishing in that offense, and now he's in a really good offense. And how many games are QT and Fuller going to be healthy? Yep. So, because I've seen a reaction, Rich, is how does Stills get on the field? Well, who cares? I mean, this matchup. I mean, with these receivers that are hurt, one of them's hurt already. We know that Stills is going to get on the field. It's going to be exciting to watch them play New Orleans week 1. By the way, one of the big marquee matchups. Last piece of the dominoes, and then we'll spend more time on week 1, Rich. Do you want to put a chip on Preston Williams, on Albert Wilson, on even like Jakeem Grant, on Devontae Parker? Do you want to try to catch some Fitz magic?
I mean, I think you could take a nice little end of the bench, shot. I mean, obviously Albert Wilson is a guy that was leading the league in yak before he got hurt last year. And then if he gets a volume bump with the kind of big playability he has, which is funny that the Chiefs got rid of Albert Wilson because he seems to fit what they want to do is, on offense, and they got rid of him. But yeah, I mean, he would be the one guy I would look at. I think Preston Wilson's probably a year away. I think even if he does play, it's going to be kind of cattywampus, I mean, it'll be a little bit all over the place a little bit, but I mean, obviously in Dynasty, you like that the door's opened, and we really aren't counting long-term on Devontae Parker, even though this staff did make it a priority to bring him back, right away, which kind of surprised a lot of us. But yeah, I mean, those would be where I would go. I would say Albert Wilson is worth an add, for your bench to see kind of where the targets lie out, especially with Fitzmagic. So, Fitzmagic's also a guy that he'll pepper the slot too. Like he's about that deep ball, but he likes to throw to the slot as well. And you're getting that big yak potential. But the thing with Albert was we're just waiting to see how healthy he is from go, because all the right things are in place and he's going to be ready to go. But you still want to see it. Is there any lingering effect? Is that burst going to be there? And that's for a couple of these guys. We talked about Will Fuller, getting the insurance on him. I mean, I still think that guys like Will Fuller, Emmanuel Sanders, Cooper Kupp, don't be surprised if those guys aren't what they were the first couple weeks.
Yeah, no, you're right. And this is one of the things, people in the chat room peppering us with week 1 start questions, which and it is that time. So,
Love it.
that's and there is, Rich, I like the way that you lay out that, hey, there are some guys that we aren't even talking about the matchup yet before we say slow your roll. Like, there's a ramp up, even though they look great in practice, even though they've made all the reports positive, to see what happens week 1 with some of these players returning from injury, and players also that have been on the injury report, like Amari Cooper.
Yeah.
So depending on if you say Amari Cooper, then you might say, well, you know what? Because this is what I was just saying to someone in the chat room with Mccoy. Like, LeSean McCoy is the kind of player that I'm fine putting my 7th or 8th round pick on in that kind of build. But maybe I might want to err on the side of, hey, week 1, let's see how he looks. Let's. And then if you profit, hey, you're going to start. If he scores 2 touchdowns like Damian Williams did in that game when Ware was the starter, basically, then you know what you've got, and you can start playing him every week until he breaks down. So this is some of these guys who've been missing time. You mentioned Robbie Anderson. So we're wrapping our brain around this stuff, and what it leads to, Rich, is even more cloudy. Week 1 is the week we have the least amount of information when we're setting our lineups. So it's also a week that you can be bolder, or maybe it's a week to run to shelter. What about Arizona versus Detroit? What about Kyler Murray? What about Christian Kirk? What about Larry Fitzgerald? Are you preaching more patience, or, hey, sit back or sit on the edge of your seat, and see what happens?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how it lays out for Arizona. So there's a lot of balls in the air here. For one, I mean, we know that they didn't show us everything, but what can they really show us that can kind of jump the shark of expectations? And I think when you look at the personnel is when I probably have the most problems with just expecting them to come out over these 3 weeks. Detroit at home is a help, but then they're at Baltimore, and then they face Carolina. Those are all defensive fronts that are a major, major problem for this offensive line, first of all. So then I look at the talent and I say, well, where can they overcome? Because we know that they're probably going to have to rely on the scheme creating lanes for David Johnson over the fact of the matchup creating for David Johnson. It's going to be a lot of week 1 through 3 where David Johnson's going to have to run out of empty sets and hopefully light boxes to hit some splash runs. Because, I mean, Snacks, Mike Daniels, Deshaun Robinson, when they traded for Snacks last year, they went from 6.3 yards per carry to 3.9 yards per carry allowed to running backs. You add Mike Daniels, too, to that mix this year. I mean, it's a problem for that offensive line. They're not going to be able to just line up and run the football. And they're not going to be able to do it at Baltimore, and they're not going to be able to do it against Carolina.
No way. 3 weeks.
Right. So you're going to be relying on David Johnson, a lot of pass catching, I think, these first 3 weeks. And I think it's going to be there. He's going to get a lot of reception boost, and he's going to catch a lot of passes this season. I full-heartedly believe in that. The question is now, when you're talking about, so if they're going to run this open air raid scheme, is the scheme going to be enough to elevate the talent? I mean, I think talent-wise, we feel good about Christian Kirk. He was a precocious wide receiver, in this scheme, recruited by Cliff Kingsbury. We feel good about him, even though what they showed in the preseason, kind of trying to feel out what they had after him and Fitzgerald. But then you've got 36-year-old Larry Fitz, who's basically he's played big slot inside, averaged about 10 yards per catch the past 2 years. What are we getting from him downfield? And then behind them, what do we got? Because we know tight ends are going to be a factor. And we're counting on a lot of unproven, rookie depth and the ghost of Michael Crabtree if he's involved.
Right.
So, I mean, I look at this, I really think that it's not going to be a week 1 hit the ground running. I really don't. Yeah. And, Detroit in that system, they were really good against rushing quarterbacks last year. They were number 2 in the league. They faced Cam Newton, allowed him 2 rushing yards. Dak Prescott, 2 rushing yards. Trubisky at 18. Russell Wilson, 15. Josh Allen only had 16 rushing yards against them. Part of that is because they couldn't cover anyone, so the quarterbacks just threw. But but it's also part, like, you never had any of those breaking runs either. Like they were a team that, said the defensive line got better as it went on. So, I mean, I'm kind of a real wait and see with Kyler Murray. I answered a lot of start-sit questions when I posed this yesterday on Twitter. Guys like Lamar Jackson, who you may have taken in the same area as him. I want to play Lamar Jackson over him. Jameis Winston. Those guys I would feel a lot more comfortable playing week 1. And if I'm wrong, then I feel really good still. Yeah, I feel really good about being wrong still. But he's definitely someone I think the first weeks. Now, weeks 4 through 11 through their bye, there's a lot more favorable spots where we can say, even if the overarching offensive talent isn't kind of what we had hoped for, but the scheme is still like working, there's a lot more matchups in that area where you could play on that than I feel like there are the first 3 weeks.
Yes, and that's definitely something that we've laid out a few times here on the couch over the last couple of weeks, that Arizona starts slow. Rich, you look at that trio that you mentioned, Detroit and Baltimore and Carolina, and it's like the buzzsaw, like, because they're going to run the ball. Like, it's the defense. The defense isn't going to come off the field. The Arizona defense, and that's why, I could flip this, and you could talk about this when I'm done ranting first, if you want. Like, what does that make guys like Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay almost like automatic plays because Arizona's defense is going to be so bad, and of course Kerryon Johnson, but you drafted him to play him anyway. So what's going to be interesting is you mentioned the scheme, and I think, Rich, week 1 more than the scheme, and I agree with you on. I like the way you set it up emotionally. I like that you're usually very analytical about these things, but emotionally, it's like, hey, if you bench your Arizona passing game pieces and they have a good week 1 against Detroit, then you're feeling good. And it's the inverse of like that week 16 championship decision. Like, what can you live with? Like, I took this guy ride or die despite the really bad matchup. I'm going to play my stud, and then I won't feel as bad, So we're trying to feel better instead of not feeling as bad. Right. So what's interesting to me about this when I look at this, Rich, though, is as much as we're looking at the scheme, what I'm going to be looking at is what Cliff Kingsbury does to craft a game plan to attack Detroit. Yes. Because I think that's more than a scheme or some advantages that Cliff Kingsbury is going to have baked in to his method, kind of like Chip Kelly. I don't think that if he has a special sauce, I think the special sauce is going to be more Belichickian, more like, well, I'm going to look at what you do and what you've got out there, and I'm going to use my pieces to put you in a compromising position. So maybe with Detroit, it might be, as you said, not David Johnson running between the tackles, maybe more David Johnson detached from the formation, attack Detroit's linebackers. And these guys that you mentioned, these big run stuffers, Ashawn Robinson and Damon Harris. And, well, if you stretch the field horizontally and you're getting the ball out quickly, I always figured with Kyler Murray, like you said, it's great they can contain the run. Teams should try to contain him as a runner and force him to think as a passer. And then Cliff Kingsbury, in turn, should not have him not think and get the ball out quickly, at least until things gel. So I'm just going to be watching how Arizona attacks Detroit, even if it's just like 5 drives, because all the Detroit drives are 12 minutes long, Yeah, it's like 7 C.J. Anderson runs and 10 Kerryon Johnson runs. So there's a lot. And I think that I ramble like this, Rich, because they're setting week 1 lineups and all this stuff. But you can lose. You can be 0-1 on most of your teams and make all the wrong decisions, but still vastly do better than your league mates if you get the right messages out of week 1. And then some of that is like being receptive to what happens instead of just comparing it against what you thought was going to happen, and starting over. Let's see who else. Well, let's talk about Green Bay and Chicago, and how you're feeling about, speaking of a new look reveal. I guess Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur, probably just how they like it, that they haven't had a lot of headlines. So this is a big deal. This is a really big deal, right? I mean, against Chicago too, on Thursday night, with the whole football world watching. How do you feel about Green Bay going in, and what are you going to be looking for?
Yeah, I'm more on the what am I looking for side with this offense. I mean, the main question is we didn't see Rodgers play all preseason. And on the other side, Trubisky played 3 snaps and handed off 3 times. So like neither one of these quarterbacks are passed in the preseason. But with Rodgers, I just want to see how much play action, how much openness he's willing to concede to LaFleur. I want to see how much he's willing to concede to LaFleur. We've already heard the comments about him, why he doesn't like play action. But if someone just showed Aaron Rodgers, hey, listen, you've been well under the league rate in play action passes the past 3 years. The last time you were above league rate in play action passing was 2014. Guess what happened? You won the goddamn MVP.
Yeah.
And if you look at from that 2014 season on, he went from having the highest yards per pass attempt in the league up until that point for those first 8 years of his career, and he's been in Andy Dalton levels the past 3 years. I mean, someone just has to point it out, like just show this guy and have it sink in. Like, yeah, this is to help you. Like, so I mean, I'm really curious to see how much of that, like how much play action they run. We kind of see in the preseason, they're going to run more, 21 and 12. a lot more. It looks like that looks to be the case. So I mean that's conducive to doing what? Running the play action pass. So I mean I'm really curious to just see what they do. Obviously it's the defense too we want to see the test come against. Because if Aaron Rodgers obviously would have come out and shredded someone like Arizona week 1, like ho hum. But now they can make a statement. There's a statement to be said, in this week 1 game. And even though it is only week 1 and we see a lot of weird things happen in week 1 that don't end up being true over the course of the season. I mean, we saw him come back on a broken leg and come back down 20 on this defense last year. That happened in week 1. So I mean, I'm just more curious to see how much he's willing to concede into the system here, and how well he's going to be. I mean, if you drafted him, obviously you're playing him. I mean, he's one of those guys. Him and Mahomes both are kind of in this weird spot. Like, well, if you paid for those guys, you're playing them, but you probably have to expect like a floor game for them, and anything plus is better. And obviously their floor is higher than a floor game from a streamer. But I mean, yeah, that's what I'm looking to see from the Packers, though. What Aaron Rodgers is willing to concede to Matt LaFleur.
Yeah, if he lets LaFleur do some of the work for him, basically.
Yes.
Like what McVay does for Goff,
Mm-hmm.
Set him up to succeed, and if he's coachable. But you mentioned what might end up being the most important thing, right? Like all this time talking about LaFleur, and it might just be that Aaron Rodgers was hurt last year. I mean,
Right.
he was significantly hurt, and maybe he's just like he's healthy again. And also, it can't hurt that he's had more time now with Marcus Valdez-Scantling. He's had more time now with Jimmy Graham and Jake Kumaro, and more time with Geronimo Allison. So this could definitely make things better against the Chicago defense. And I guess in the background there is how much going Fangio to Pagano, does that matter? I think when we see Denver's defense, we'll see it matters for Denver's defense. I think Denver's defense is going to elevate back to that. Like sometimes they're just going to totally smother the team that they're playing, at least in terms of the passing game.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned the Chicago side. Trubisky's also not thrown a pass. I guess the headline here might be David Montgomery. Is David Montgomery, if you drafted him as your running back 2, which you might have had to, do you play him as your running back 2 this week?
Yeah, he's kind of in that just nice like soft spot of RB2s this week, and there's a lot of bad running back matchups out there too.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I can see why you would want to elevate him. If you draft him as a lower end RB2, I think that's where you start, and then there's upside there. You get him as a home favorite. The Packers defense also has a lot of moving parts. We don't really know how that's going to look either. All the pass rushers they added, they still have an inexperienced secondary. I mean, I think guys that struggled last year, Jair Alexander and Kevin King, they had a couple moments, but overall struggled. But I mean, those are guys that, the league was high on, and I think overall, like scouting was high on, that still could be like the book's not written on those guys. Basically, what I'm saying, like even though Jair Alexander didn't play that well last year, outside of that, Brandon Cooks game, like he still has upside to be better than what he was as a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know like what this Packers defense is going to look like either, especially with all the pass rushers they added. I know that the Bears defense going from Bryce Callahan to Buster Screen is a gigantic downgrade.
Yeah,
I know that is one spot.
And Damus to Clinton Dix too in this exact game.
Because what helped the Bears is they had 2 guys last year that were basically playing at shutdown levels. You had Kyle Fuller and you had Callahan. So you can't funnel targets to this one boundary spot, and you can't funnel targets into the slot. Mm-hmm. It's hard. It's hard to then where do we direct offense? This year, teams are going to be able to pick on the slot against the Bears. You have Buster Screen, who has allowed the 3rd and 5th most receiving yards in the slot over the past 2 years. Last year, he allowed the most yards per coverage snap in the NFL. I mean, teams are going to be able to now have a soft spot to pick on this defense, whereas last year it was a lot harder to kind of find a weakness in that, Fangio scheme. That's a big loss for them, going from Bryce Callahan, because now teams can just outright avoid Fuller.
Yeah.
We're just gonna ignore you and not throw targets over there. So it means
in this game, Aaron Rodgers will throw some balls to Davante Adams no matter what. But yes,
yep, yeah. So I mean, it's gonna be interesting, because Mccoy is a solid player too. So I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see if these targets and they become just this team, the Bears, that we just like target them every week based on whatever slot guy that they're facing in, and if it ends up being a good guy that moves around, we're even more excited. I'm really excited to see how this plays out. Like I said, it's a game that has a lot of dynamics too. We really just can't go off of last year's Bears defense, last year's Packers defense, and even last year's Packers offense. I mean, the Bears offense, we have a little more stability, where it's just a sum of parts. It's a good sum of parts too.
And we'll see about Eddie Pinheiro. He shanked that one kick in the fourth preseason game. But you mentioned one really interesting with the slot there. Obviously, Geronimo Allison getting a chance there. I called him screen door. Buster screen. And then we'll see about Amos and Clinton Dix trading teams here. But Adrian Amos was an underrated player for them. Although I keep reading stuff, Rich, Eddie Jackson's even better this year, which is hard to fathom. And he got hurt last year too. But on the Green Bay defense side, the interesting thing here too is I don't even know who's starting at that other inside linebacker spot for them. I don't even. They lost Oren Burks, and then I think there was a rookie or a young player they were looking at that they lost already. So that's Tariq Cohen. That makes me think get Tariq Cohen matched up with whoever that Green Bay linebacker is, and that could be your 70-yard touchdown. That'll be fun to watch. A great and intriguing matchup and a pivotal matchup. I mean, a pivotal matchup in a division where you might say you could credibly pick any one of the four teams. Well, we'll give Matt Patricia a little bit of credit here. Let's see what else stands out here. You definitely mentioned. I like that you touched on Damian really quick because San Francisco Tampa doesn't San Francisco Tampa Rich look like the game that's if in doubt of a player in this game, if you're on the fence and it's someone in this game against someone not in this game, that you just want to get a piece of the San Francisco Tampa game.
Yeah, I mean, it's on paper it looks good, but I mean, it also has we have some trap potential here. One that we saw it last year when these two teams played, and granted it was Nick Mullins, but I mean the 49ers are just a team that have not gone to the East Coast well at all. They've lost 12 straight games in a row. Now this is a late kickoff. Last year was that 10 p.m. West Coast, or is that 10 a.m. West Coast time start? It was the 1 p.m. This is a 4 p.m. game here, so that helps the 49ers a little bit. But their first two games are East Coast games because they play Cincinnati week 2 as well. And then also just we haven't seen any stability out of the 49ers that we kind of were hoping for. We saw the signings they made. We thought Garoppolo's going to have this improved, offensive core. But we still have a lot of answers outside of George Kittle still. Yeah. He's still the only guy we really know about. I think it's fun. I think a guy like Marquise Goodwin is fun, like a DFS guy that's fun. He's going to get Vernon Hargreaves a lot in that game. He's the one guy that we know is going to be on the field for the full allotment of snaps. We don't know about Dante Pettis. He's dealt with mental issues and physical issues as he's coming back from a groin injury too that he suffered at the end. But I think the Bucs side holds up their end. Well, I think they're going to hold up their end here because we're getting Bosa and D Ford back off of not playing the whole preseason and off injuries. So, I mean, we don't know what to count on that route. And then the secondary is just still a huge question mark for the 49ers. The back end is just still not good. So if you're not getting that pass rush, you're getting a team at home, the Bucs, and all the matchups just line up. I mean, Mike Evans has just crushed in 2 games. Anytime, even if you want to say, well, he could line up against Richard Sherman, he had 6 or 116 when these two teams played last year. And when he faced heads up and Sherman guarded him when they faced when Sherman was in Seattle, he caught 2 touchdowns on Sherman. So we're not really worried. And Winston's another one of those guys you talked about. He doesn't care if Sherman's on Mike Evans. He doesn't care. And then Godwin played 100% of the snaps at Winston this preseason, and just used to have to eat the chalk on Godwin. Everything sets up. And we've had to do it all summer. It's he was just a hard guy to poke holes into. He's going to be in that big slot role. K'Wan Williams is already kind of banged up coming off injury. If he doesn't play, it's going to be Jimmy Ward moving into that slot. It really sets up well on the Bucs side in general. You talk about O.J. Howard, his jump in preseason. He played 95% of snaps with Jameis on the field. He has never had a game where he crossed over 80% of the team snaps. That's going to happen this year. So, I mean, I like the Bucs side. I think there's trap potential for the game, maybe not being as explosive as we hope because the 49ers, I don't know if they hold up their end of the bargain. And the Bucs were also a team that played better at home defensively than they did last year as well. And that held up against good teams like the Saints and stuff too towards the end of the year. So, I mean, I think there is some trap potential if you think it's a bonanza. But yeah, I mean, definitely there are some intriguing pieces in that game. There's a lot of layers to it too. I don't want to spend the whole time on that one.
No. Well, there's a lot of layers to all of them, Rich. It's okay. I apologize because we're about quality, not quantity here. I mean, Cecil and I will do a pair of shows where we preview every game and we try to be comprehensive. But really, I think what's great, Rich, it's how many years you've been coming on the show now, man? 4 or 5, 6 years. Yeah. I think I'm thinking of Rummy, of our uncle.
Oh yeah.
run for Johnny, because I think he was the first one to say many years back, and he's also been on the couch to say like, you've got to get this Lord Reeves on the couch. Makes me think of that, but also you're able to at speed weave together the tapestry of all the things that you're considering when you come up with some sort of actionable advice. And it's just so laden with information. It also shows all the things you're considering, but everybody else should be in that mode for week one, at least, to understand that the framework of this stuff. But you touched on so many good things there. Cause I think for San Francisco, K'Wan Williams is banged up, right? I mean, look, Chris Godwin's going to have Chris Godwin's have a great game. Howard's got absolutely, like you said, we're going to see a bigger and better Howard. What's that going to mean in this offense? Even, someone like Brashad Perryman, just to watch and see. Just to see, if we can't just shrug it off if Perryman has like 3 for 100 and a touchdown to like, well, he's facing what, fellow Witherspoon or whoever. And then on the Tampa side, let me ask you this, because this is one of my pet fascinations here. I'm fascinated with Dare Ogunbowale in this game. And I'm fascinated with him also from a standpoint of a season long, because this is kind of like Devin Singletary. Ogunbowale and Singletary are actually situated somewhat similarly in that their coaching staffs are open to giving them as much work as they show that they deserve. Now, Singletary comes with more pedigree and so on, but Ogunbowale is somebody that has all the momentum in this backfield. How much has he put himself on your radar in the last month?
Yeah, the thing about Ogunbowale is that I like Arians. So we talk about, I talk about those purgatory backs and how there's so much the NFL has shown like an unwillingness, unless they spend high cap on these guys or it's a necessity, to like really lean in on these guys. But Ogunbowale is playing for a coach that has, like, Bruce Arians has played svelte backs like his whole, like, he's not care. Like I wish more NFL coaches would get on board with this, because like there's no proof that like these 200-pound guys get hurt more than the 220-pound guys. But we still have this hump to clear, and I always still like involve it in my process because it's held true. Coaches have been unwillingness. We've seen it with across the team in this game with Matt Breida. We're going to see it a little bit. I don't know. I don't think it'll bleed in with Eckler as much, because the other guy with him is also one of those guys. But we've seen it happen so many times in the NFL to that type of running back. But Arians has said, like, I just want to I'll play my guy. I don't care. And so you don't really care. He only has to beat out Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber now.
Right.
A lot can happen there. I mean, granted, you might say, all right, big scheme of things, like, it's not an offense we expect to like really run the ball and be productive. But if he can somehow get ahead and is a 65-35, 70-30 type of guy at some point this season, and he can catch the ball, then that gives you flex upside plus, which is the inroad you're looking for. The specific game, like I said, we need the 49ers to do their part in this, like for a guy like him, because if they can just lean on and just like don't care if Peyton Barber's running for 3.5 yards per carry, and it doesn't matter because they're up 17, like, we'll probably get that if they can. So, I mean, we want the 49ers to do their part week one, but I mean, the door is wide open, because it's completely opened up now that Ronald Jones is like he's really playing catch up out of this group.
Yeah.
It might be the odd guy out, to start the year. So yeah, I mean, he's a guy you should roster at the end of your rosters and just kind of see what it is. We talk about, I mean, is it a situation that's desirable? Absolutely not. But like we talk about the Dolphins wide receivers, like, absolutely not. But when we're talking about stacking guys towards the end of your roster, I mean, these aren't guys you're leaning on and counting on for production. You're kind of just in a mode where you want to see where the flower grows, see what it turns into.
Yes, and and where the flower grows, or one of the things I want to draw a little bit of attention to that you wove in there, Rich, is the psychological profile of the coach. I like that. That Bruce Arians doesn't care, and Bruce Arians, if Ogunbowale, and one of the things that I like about putting a chip on Ogunbowale is the kinds of plays and personnel sets they're in when he's on the field are the parts of the offense that they should look the best doing. So he'll just get like cool by association, like they could just be like the most productive in the mode of offense that he's the best back for, and it's the reveal, and it's holding him. It's like the seeds to see what grows. And that's what's important. And that's always the way I think about my last few roster spots at this time of year, with the exception of like really deep leagues where there's not a lot of roster churn through the waiver wire, but you want that first 2 or 3 week reveal. Even somebody like Malcolm Brown. mean, look, if Todd Gurley only gets like 12 or 15 touches, or no matter how many touches he gets, if he doesn't look like Todd Gurley pre-injury, even if Malcolm Brown touches the ball twice, his value is going to go way up. And you want to have him on your roster for that instead of Chase Edmonds. I don't want to, maybe David Johnson gets hurt. Or hey, look, maybe Chase Edmonds, speaking of Cliff Kingsbury and his adaptability, maybe Cliff Kingsbury says, hey, Chase Edmonds is actually one of our 3 or 4 best players to touch the ball in this offense, and I'm going to use him as such. It's possible. Be open to anything. But at least early expectations. I guess based on that, Rich, instead of giving you something like teeing it up, since we only have about 5 minutes left, really, I almost want to open the floor and say, like, what's on your mind, or how, what are your thoughts coming out of this summer? Talk about sharp football and what you're doing there, or whatever you want, man. Because it's good to like take a breath, because we're really not going to come up for air again for like 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get the plugs in at the end, but I mean, I've come on the show, like you said, for 4 or 5 years, and I'm someone that always like, this is my area. This is like what I love as an analyst. I don't love the summer stuff as much. I'm someone that always has believed that bulk production like tells a lot. Just a lot of half truths in looking at seasons in totality going forward and looking backwards at them. Fantasy football is a counter punching game. It's a game of who are you better at making adjustments than the rest of your league mates. That's kind of what I tried to do in like an article, like the worksheet. I tried to be on top of trends and things that are in motion in the NFL, like things you can be ahead of. Because that's just how I believe that it's one of the edges in winning. I go on these rants of like, well, this guy was the RB15 last year. Like, well, what are you telling me? Like, it's we're not saying a lot though. Like in totality, when you say stuff like that, if he wasn't the RB like 1 through 4, what are we saying? Like, there's a lot of things in motion, and we're trying to pick out spots where we can play these guys, because fantasy football will always be about being in on the right pockets of production. When are you getting the right production for your players? Because I mean, listen, you had Todd Gurley last year. You got to the promised land, but when you got there, he wasn't there. That we talk about a number of players that you said that you get to those matchups towards the end of the season. You might have a player that you rode the whole season, but he got me here, but I have this one game. I have to win this game to win it all. Like, what do you do? Those hard decisions. Like, that's what fantasy football is about. That's how you win weeks. And then when you win weeks, you win leagues, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, this is just my area. I'm so glad we reached this starting line, because the other stuff, I like it. I love all things fantasy football, but I mean, this is more of my wheelhouse and where I feel like I do better as an analyst and as a fantasy player than I do over the summer months.
Yeah, I love it. I just quoted you on Twitter with that. I liked it so much. That it's a game of counterpunching. Are you better than your league mates at making adjustments? And I think that bringing it around to the true essence of the couch, because every now and then the podcast I really want to do bleeds through, like the deep thinking, the navel gazing, the flights of fancy, that from the more like spiritual or psychological approach, that fantasy football isn't about being right. It isn't about having like this peerless ability to see into the future. It's actually about seeing the present and reacting appropriately. It's about being flexible. Like how are you flexible in the right ways? Then that came out a little differently than I expected it to. But that's always
fantasy Kama Sutra, baby.
Exactly. That's what the couch is really for. This is a tantric couch. Like after hours, this couch it has other possibilities. No, but truly, I think that you said it. And again, I've always admired your work, because it's a combination of observations, like observational data, and then looking at numbers, looking at like tranches of data to reinforce or to maybe dispel certain ideas about trends and things like that. Your rabbi at Roto World back in the day, Evan, that you mentioned. It's marrying these things, and by doing that, you are in the best position to be the most flexible. But it's not about getting the answers on the test. It's almost like fantasy football is a test. Like we look back to our academic days, and it's like you take the test and the test gets graded, and then they give you the book, a different book, and then you can go back and rewrite some of your answers. You get another chance. How do you do with that? It isn't just your first set of answers, man. So That was very well said. And again, folks need to know that. And well, first of all, folks need to know that there's some great analysts still at Roto World, but also that at Sharp Football Analysis, and Warren Sharp, I'm sure, will be paying a visit or two to the couch during this year with his trenchant analysis. You get Rich Hribar, and I guess, Rich, those people who don't know your work, this is a great opportunity to get acquainted with it. And if they do, they get more of the good stuff at Sharp.
Yeah, so last time I was on the show, I was still at Roto World, and I left there to join Warren Sharp at Sharp Football, and we started a site that's kind of all encompassing. The long term vision is to have stats, have betting, have fantasy, everything in one, like a one stop shop. But that's where the worksheet's going to be this year. And if you aren't familiar with the worksheet, I mean, some of it will be up tonight, some of it, and then the whole thing will absolutely be up by tomorrow. But it's basically just a top-down view of stuff you hear me talk about on this show, talk about every fantasy relevant player. And I talk about it not from a start-sit sense, but like a individual player expectation stance. I just talk about player expectations, not putting guys in a list, even though we'll have rankings and stuff and you can cross-reference that. But I like to talk about fantasy and player expectations, so when you have your roster, you can kind of go from there. If you feel strongly about a player versus not, and kind of the matchup and stuff like that. Filled with all kinds of data. And it comes out in first thing in industry. This thing it'll be a part out on Tuesday, everything on Wednesday, which kind of just start off your fantasy football preparation for the week. And if you want to check it out, we're doing trial runs where you can come in just for like weekly passes and stuff like that, or you can come in and just check it out if you're not familiar with it, and see if you like it. And if you don't, it's only 1 week, and you can bow out. It's just a little trial, little taste if you want. And if not, it's not your thing. So be it. But definitely, if you're willing to check it out, go over Sharp Football Analysis, where I'll be cranking out all the fantasy stuff this year.
Wonderful, and we're happy to have you, and happy to have all of you out there listening. And thank you so much. Good luck week 1, because you're so classy.